Hello there, folks. Back again for another video. In this one, we're going to be carrying on our sort of retrospective back through the Lord of the Rings. You might remember that the last time we talked about Middle-earth, we were looking through the Fellowship of the Rings rulebook and having a sort of reminisce about everything that was inside it. Well, in this one, we're going to be looking at the Two Towers. So this was the second big box set that Games Workshop did for the Lord of the Rings that obviously followed on from the films. And this was their real kind of attempt to turn the game into, well, essentially a big strategy war game, as well as it being a scenario-based adventure for you and your friends to play through. It's a very similar feel to a lot of the book. You've got still some amazing artwork and designs and all that kind of thing. The Heroes of Helm's Deep there, which is one of my favourite sets of models. Faramir and his Rangers. And Gimli, the Helm's Deep version of Gimli, battling against Uruk-hai, somewhere around the Deeping War, perhaps. So yeah, we had a breakdown of everything that we've, tend to have seen in the book previous and stuff. So we have all the lovely artwork, an introduction to what they're trying to do, the breakdown of things into basic and special rules and all that kind of stuff that we'd seen previously as well. But the big thing for this one, and it's something that we'll obviously get to, was the addition of siege rules. So you could play out some of the big things like Helm's Deep, as would be the case. And also you've got a lot more rules in here for how cavalry worked and all that kind of stuff, which was also incredibly important at the same time. So yeah, let's just have a flick through and see what it's like. The thing that I really liked is that they put this in, and it's something that they carried through into the latest version of the rulebook actually, is that they've broken down some of the different profiles that you might get in the game, but they've themed it to the forces that you would see in this book. So, I mean, the photography is obviously tied to the movies and the storyline, but so is all this stuff. So they have Uruk-hai here with pikes and Uruk-hai with crossbowmen and stuff, Mordor orcs with swords and bows and that kind of thing, rather than them being elves or men of Numenor, men of Gondor, etc., and that kind of thing. A lot of the basics pretty much stayed the same, as far as I remember anyway. It's been a long time since I actually played this, but I think a lot of what made Lord of the Rings good has kind of been fairly simple and similar throughout, really. I think one of the big things was the addition of probably more clarification, an additional bit of extra attention given to certain elements of the book to try and make it a little bit quicker and easy to read and stuff as well. But the basics of what you're getting here is pretty much the same as what you had in the first book, to be honest. And again, I just loved all the amazing photography and things that they put into the game, which was so nice to see. And it was also a great opportunity to start looking at stuff that you wouldn't necessarily have seen in the movies. So, for example, the bit with Gimli sitting on the Uruk-hai with the axe in his head, and the whole axe and his nervous system thing was pretty big and pretty cool. But the other thing that was really weird was that this was where you were like, huh? Elves at Helm's Deep? What the hell? What's going on? When I'm not entirely sure many people had actually seen the film by that point. I think that was the case anyway. And so people were like, what have they done? But, it turned out all right in the end. I think I personally liked the book version of it, but I think it was pretty cool to see the Haldir and his elves in there as well at the same time, at least for the wow factor, I guess. But so yeah, the big thing was cavalry. So this was just cavalry has been slightly updated and upgraded since the time of seeing this, but this was throwing in a whole bunch of different bits and pieces that you need for cavalry and how they would be included in your games, especially because it was a game of, very up close and personal fighting and that kind of stuff. So you would have had to need a lot of sort of intricacies in order to make sure that you worked out how individuals were hit and mounting and dismounting and that kind of thing. And, if that was in a larger game, I think that would be daunting. But because the Lord of the Rings was essentially still being played as a kind of skirmish game at this point, I think it was fair enough to throw that kind of stuff into the mix. So there you got all the stuff for Throne Riders and that kind of stuff. How cavalry fought in combat. The extra attack that you got for fighting as well. And knocking people to the ground, which is a really cool thing that I always forget about throwing into the mix. But it's something that definitely need to remember. This was also a really nice time to start seeing a lot more of the big stuff. So we didn't actually get Sauron as a model back in this book, but we got rules and everything for him this time around, which was always nice to see. You got your stuff there for heroes and how they were represented. So you got your might, will, fate, and all that kind of good stuff as well. Still got the same heroic actions and how they work. So your heroic move, heroic shooting, and heroic combat. They obviously upgraded that and added to things later on down the line with more heroic actions. You had a few more bits and pieces for weaponry. So they talked a little bit more about things like bladed bows and spears, knives, daggers, two-handed swords and axes, shields and how they worked, and how shielding was something that you could actually do in-game, which I think was pretty awesome. I can't remember whether or not they had shielding in the original rules, actually. Let's have a look back and see if we can find it. For equipment types, I'm not sure if they did or if it just gave you +1 defense. As we take a look back in time, weapons, shields. Oh, there you go. So they did have shielding back then as well. That's pretty cool. So I'm learning while you guys are learning. That's kind of nice. But yeah, so you had stuff in there for shielding and how that worked. Pikes were still a thing, obviously, being able to fight through 2 ranks. And then we had the additional rules for sieging and talking about how you'd set up sieges. I know a lot of people made their own castles, but a lot of folks also got big polystyrene blocks and made up their castles and things. It was always really good because TV packaging or PC packaging came with big chunky semi-wall sections that if you did a little bit of carving to, you could actually turn into really awesome castles and make little forts and stuff. But it was always nice. It was nice seeing all of this come through. Not that I ever played a siege or anything, but I mean, I've just never had the time, unfortunately. But or the inclination, I guess. But seeing the additional rules for sieges and stuff in here was really cool, and it wasn't lacking in any sense. It was pretty in depth, to be honest, which was pretty crazy. The thing that was really interesting about this edition of the game is that whereas with the first version of the game, so the Fellowship of the Ring, I just had that as a Christmas present. But with this version, me and my friends split the box. So I got the Rohan side and he got the Uruk side. And I think, well, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but we played through a couple of scenarios, but it didn't really get much further, to be honest. It was really interesting, actually. Sort of how in-depth we actually went with this, but yeah. A few additional bits and pieces here for troops and characters and things. So one of the nice things, obviously, is that they changed the characters to represent their 2 Towers versions. So they have all their equipment that they had in the previous ones, which was always nice to see. You've got your elven cloaks as standard on all these guys. You just pick them up and add them to their kit for 10 points each. You've got Merry and Pippin, Gimli and Legolas. Possibly one of my favourite sculpts of Legolas. I think it's a phenomenal look for him. Almost as if that's about that just before he leaps onto a shield and slides down the stairs. You've got Aragorn in there. Obviously, Boromir's no longer with us at this point, but he's got his rules in there if you wanted to keep playing with him. And you wanted to play a different story, which is always cool. You've got Elrond and Haldir. And that's Haldir, the unarmoured version of it. And of course, they did an armoured version with bow and everything like that. And you can give him that if you want to. But that's Haldir as if he was in the first movie, leading the way. Elrond, that classic old miniature for him. The Elven Captain, which was still the customised one, and the Captain of Men is still the same. But the interesting thing here was that the Captain was essentially designed so that you could use this to represent either the Rohirrim, or the Men of Gondor, or the Men of Numenor, however you want. It was just essentially a a generic captain of man. The other thing that was really interesting as well was that at this point, with throwing spears, you could arm people with throwing spears, but nowadays you just get it as standard, really. But back in this day, if you had a throwing spear, you'd have to ride forward, throw the throwing spear, and then swap it out for a model that didn't have one anymore, which I always thought was really quirky. I mean, obviously, it's a lot more additional work and stuff. That was the other thing, but yeah, bit of a pain in the bottom. Rules for Theoden, leading the way as he was. No will, which I think is quite fitting for him, but 2 might and 2 fate. Éomer, Captain of Rohan. I always loved this version of Éowyn as well. I thought that model for Éowyn it's one I've got now, thankfully. It's a really nice one. A stunning miniature for her, and it was really awesome to see her character follow through into this and get stats and everything as well. The other thing that's quite interesting is that this talks about a bit that isn't really shown. During the fighting of Helm's Deep, she proves herself the match for any man or Uruk-hai. That's because there was actually going to be a scene with her fighting against the Uruk-hai in the Glittering Caves. Oh man, Gamling as well. Gamling's one of my favourite characters. I kind of like him in the books, Gamling the Old, but I also really like him in the film. I think his character's really neat. He doesn't get a lot of screen time, but he always just feels kind of badass, which is what you want, really. Commanding the sieges and stuff. Faramir, Damrod as well. Gandalf the White. So suddenly he gets a huge list of additional powers and upgrades and everything like that. So, spoilers if you'd not seen Two Towers. That's Gandalf the White. Treebeard gets rules as well. Your High Elf warriors. Your Wood Elf warriors. And again, this was kind of a hint towards what we're getting in the future. Your Warriors of Gondor if you were human, and then Warriors of Gondor if you were a Warrior of Rohan. Who had fairly simple additional... fairly similar rules, I think, which is quite interesting. But obviously you had the additional bits and pieces about hand weapons and what they could be armed with and that kind of thing. You got the Riders of Rohan there and the Rangers of Gondor starting into the mix. And then the Dark Lord Sauron finally got his rules, which is pretty insane for commanding the battlefield. And the fact that he had to be killed you had to try and kill him multiple times to try and get him, which was quite neat. So you couldn't actually get him while he had the ring on his finger, which was kind of cool. And then you kind of represent the ring being chopped off by that lucky strike. The Ring Wraiths and the Balrog included. Saruman the White, looking pretty badass again. Orc captains and Moria Goblin captains. I think these were still metal kits at this time, so it was still pretty hard to get you, apart from the standard Moria Goblins. But everything else was kind of big metal orcs. You got Grishnak in there, you got Shaku, the Uruk-hai captains, the Wildmen chieftains. Gollum gets the rules as well. Grima Wormtongue, sitting alongside your enemy's heroes. And it was nice to see some of these slightly less combat-y based characters getting a look in, which was always cool. And I like that this kind of stuff has stayed the same all the way through. And I love that they really played with the mechanics of Grima to kind of build the character of Grima from the movies into the game playing experience. And I like that you've got this. For some reason, it's possible to fathom Grima is always more effective if the evil player actually makes an effort to offer bad advice and pessimistic forecasts of doom to his victims as he follows them around the battlefield. I love that kind of little sort of role-playing note. So it was really neat. It was really cool. Uruk-hai, Berserkers, badass, cave trolls. So they took everything that was there before, but they just basically added to it, which is obviously key. Scenario-wise, this is the scenario that me and my friend played pretty much constantly. I think we played this 3 or 4 times. I'm not entirely sure I ever won the scenario and saved anybody from the Burning Palm. I also think that I immediately regretted collecting Rohan, because because I really liked Rohan, but I really didn't like painting horses. And I'm not entirely sure that I actually painted any of my horses or any of my Rohan until I started playing the game over the last couple of years. So that's quite a sad indictment of my time with the Two Towers version of the game. And I think at that point, me and my friend played it, and we did play a little bit of the campaign stuff, but I'm not entirely sure we dived too deep into it. I think at that point we were at college and that kind of thing as well, so it was a little bit rougher to try and get time to sit down at the table and play games. I think at that point we started playing a little bit more D&D and stuff as well, so wargaming took a little bit of a backseat, but some cool scenarios in there. So that's the Wrath of Rohan scenario, which is really good. The Warg attack scenario. The ambush in Ithilien, where Faramir and his rangers take out the Mumaks and stuff. Although I'm not entirely sure that they actually got given Mumaks. No, they didn't. In there. And then they broke down Helm's Deep into a series of different scenarios. So the thing that was really nice about this is that at this point you probably got your hands on a bunch of the metal characters, and then a lot of this was either metal, but most of it was plastic. So you could actually get away with actually putting together some really nice forces for this fairly quickly, which was quite nice. So you got the Deeping Wall, the Gateway, so barring the gate as it gets smashed down by the opposition, riding out with Theoden at your side. In that last-ditch attempt, and the relief of Helm's Deep as Gandalf and co. charge down off the side and assault the forces of Isengard and the Uruk-hai. Then you got your escape from Osgiliath, which is a pretty neat little scenario where you're trying to get yourselves out of the city while being hunted, which is quite cool. You've got Isengard, so you've actually got the attack on Isengard by although I love how in this one they've got, as I say, they've changed it a little bit here, really. But the idea is that you're not actually, you're kind of like clearing out the enemies from there and sort of telling us a little bit of an interesting spin on it rather than it being a standard game. Because you've got Aragorn, Legolas, Gandalf, Theoden, and Gamling, Gimli, Merry, Pippin, and Treebeard against Uruk-hai, alongside Saruman and Grima at the same time. So it's a little bit different from what you'd imagine, what you would have thought. But yeah, a lot of the same stuff about building and painting your models and playing around with that kind of stuff, which is always nice. More tips for painting, which always come in handy. More beautiful image art of the miniature art, of the miniatures in fighting away. And again, they've updated them with with the newer models. So you've got the newer Legolas, the new Aragorn and stuff in there as well. And some really interesting stuff here about painting faces and getting that right about colours and stuff to bring them all out, which is always good to see. Additional bit about conversions and bringing them to life. So if you needed special characters or captains for your armies. Some more work on banners. And then we have the obligatory stunning, lovely shots of the setups by the Games Workshop crew. There's your banners and stuff that you could print off at home. Some elves versus some cave trolls. Your kind of interesting little terrain breakdown, which I think a lot of it was fairly similar. Although this was quite nice for kind of building quick and easy castles. You just need to get yourself some styrofoam, and away you go, really. I think this would still be quite effective today, to be honest, which would be nice to dive in and have a go at. A big Helm's Deep setup, and a sort of breakdown of how they did that. And Bree as well. And a little bit more on the hobby. And then we got a look at some of the stuff that was coming up for the game as well at the time. So we knew we were going to be getting all of this stuff down the pipeline. So we're going to get Gimli, the Rangers of Gondor, Faramir, Eowyn, the Riders of Rohan, which had obviously come out at that point, Gamling and that kind of stuff. A couple more orcs and other types of Uruk-hai and things, especially things like the Uruk-hai crossbowmen and things being thrown into the mix. And then a breakdown of all of your different profiles and stuff. And a quick sort of getting started selection is there, which was really cool. Always nice to see. And breaking down the game there. Oh, man, and there's that scene of Eowyn in the glittering caves with her bloody hands after she's just fought some Uruk-hai or is about to fight some Uruk-hai. I wish we would have seen that because I think it would have been amazing. Maybe in a future version of the movie. Who knows? And then some more beautiful artwork of the characters doing their dastardly business. We nearly even got Arwen fighting at Helm's Deep, battling her way through the hordes of Uruk-hai and stuff, but that was not to be. Although you can still see her in some of the effect shots of when the relief happens. You can see a flash of purple and pink from when she was included. Did they even put the rules for Arwen back in here, or did you have to? Did you have to go back to the old book to find her rules? Elrond, Haldir, and the Elven captains. Yeah, it looks like you had to go back to the Fellowship in order to get your rules for Arwen and stuff. But of course, everything was fairly similar rules-wise, so it didn't necessarily matter that you had to do that. But there we go. A quick flick through the Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers strategy battle game. This was the second book in the series for the initial strategy battle game, and it was another bit of good fun. I played this edition of the rules for a little while, for a couple of years, and then I kind of fell out of playing Lord of the Rings properly. I don't think I returned until, well, I didn't return properly until we got to the era of the Escape from Goblin Town, of all things. But I still picked up a couple of miniatures here and there and sort of played around with my collection. Just never really played the game, which was an interesting thing. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go into the next book. So we're going to be looking at the Return of the King's book as well, and we'll flick through that. It'll be interesting for me because it'll be something that I've not really looked through before. But yes, watch out for that in the near future. I hope you quite like this sort of quick breakdown of the Two Towers book and this retrospective of it. Again, it was really fun playing the game at this period. As you'll have seen, well, one of the interesting things about the starter set was that it had the Uruk-hai and the Riders of Rohan in there. So again, there weren't any big heroes in the box at this point. So you were playing around with the Uruk-hai with their big pikes, which always snapped off. And then you had the Uruk-hai with their swords and shields. And their swords were always really badly attached to their hands. So they always snapped as well. So you've got to be really careful with them. But then you had the really nice Riders of Rohan, which I think are still a great kit even to this point, actually. So yeah. Some really good stuff there that laid the groundwork for even more awesome bits and pieces when it came to Lord of the Rings. And it meant that they didn't really have to do that much more when it came to moving to the Return of the King, to be honest. This kind of set up the game to be as chunky and as big as it needed to be honest. But yeah, a really fun book. It was interesting them going from kind of this style, this representation of the book, to this and the Return of the King having a very similar look and feel. So I kind of wish this had been green. So you would have had green, red, and blue, just like the DVD covers. But there we go. But anyway, yeah. The Two Towers. Please let me know what you thought about the Two Towers rules and if you enjoyed playing them during the time. Have you ever been tempted to go back and have a look through one of these old books and see where the game came from and where it was going and stuff? Please let me know down in the comments below. And as always, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And I'll be back with another video very soon. There's also a Ko-fi link down below as well. So if you like what I do and you want to donate me a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, you can do there. But the main thing is to get involved in the conversation and do all that commenting goodness because I love interacting with what you guys are up to. There we go. The Two Towers, an interesting flick back through history and a fun little point in the strategy battle game's life. I'm going to move on to another video, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!